Now, you were like a crusader against corruption in Armenia, and you were very vocal, you outspoken, and wouldn't hide your opinion about quality of anti-corruption efforts, how Armenian government was fighting corruption, whether they were fighting corruptions or not. And very often we would hear, criticism about your comments on corruption. What's your, would you say that during your tenure things have changed?
Well, first, Harry, thanks for welcoming me today. I'm pleased that one of my last official events here in Armenia will be to come here and talk to you and meet your staff. And just congratulations on the great work that you do here. Let me be clear. I spoke about corruption and our concerns about corruption because I heard the Armenian people talking about that. I heard Armenian people saying, this is not the way we want our society to run. We want a fair, level playing field for everyone. And I also spoke about it because I knew how important investment is, foreign investment in particular. And really my assessment was, what was holding back some of that assessment was a feeling that foreign investors, even Armenian business people, and whether they were American or European, Russian or Chinese, the field wasn't level, that not everyone was treated the same, and that kept investment out. And as someone and representing a government, the US government that wants to see Armenia move forward, we knew that corruption had to be tackled. And so that's why we spoke about it. And I felt like what we tried to do was really amplify Armenian voices. The voices in Armenia that were already focused on this issue and protesting about this issue and trying to reform the system. So we helped civil society, we brought in our own experts from the United States, and I'll be honest, there were people in the government that also knew the issue had to be addressed. And we're trying to do reforms from within, and we would work with them too. You ask, have I seen progress? I would have to say yes. I have to say the events of April and May really, I think, were driven in some part by the Armenian people's desire to make this a fair, more equitable place. And I think they're moving in the right direction.
I think I have an opinion that you knew what people wanted, actually, to fight this corruption, to eradicate the corruption. And this is the most popular topic, in Armenia. So now people applaud anything that the current government does against corruption. And
absolutely. And let me be clear, every country has corruption. Yes. We have corruption in the United States. It's something you have to fight against as a society, using every tool you have every day. And you have to make sure that you send the message, corruption is unacceptable. It's not how we operate. I would say the other message, though, that's important is when you move forward, it's important that you follow the rule of law and that there be due process and that there not be, as the Prime Minister himself has said, vendettas. Cases need to be looked at closely and they need to be handled in a fair way. And again, that's something the international investment community will want to see, that corruption cases are being handled in accordance with Armenian law.
Mr. Ambassador, now we know that you were, whenever you had a chance to talk to American business community, you would encourage them to come to Armenia and, invest in Armenia. But there were some certain, problems in Armenia, like oligarchy, they were, holding key or control over Armenian economy, and there was no equal treatment of all businesses. So there were a lot of problems in that. So when you return to America, what would you tell the American business people? How would you describe the change that happened in Armenia?
Well, first, I should say, I'm not going to have to sell Armenia as much, I don't think. There is an enormous amount of interest in the international business community and the American business community, both diasporan and non-diasporan, about looking at Armenia. Armenia is really having a moment right now, and it's important that the government and the business community here and all your friends in the international community, we help build on that momentum for you. So there's a lot of interest. I'm going to tell the business community that there's real change happening. I can see some change. There is a political will to fight corruption, to make sure there's an equal playing field for everyone. There is political will to put in some reforms that will be necessary to really prevent corruption from happening in the future. I will say that as I've just said, I'm concerned that we need to be sure that these cases are carried out in accordance with the rule of law, due process, and I know the government understands that. That's what the investment community will be looking for. They'll want to see that as you move forward, you do two things. You look at corruption cases in the past, you try and reclaim things that were stolen from Armenian society, and you do that with due process. And that you put in new reforms, systematic reforms, to help make this more transparent and accountable. I sense that's what the Armenian people want, so I'm confident, and I will tell the American business community that.
And here's the key question, I think. What has just happened in Armenia? How would you qualify developments since, April?
Well, what we saw in April and May was an Armenian-led, Armenian-driven event where the Armenian people, in an inspiring way, quite honestly, through peaceful civil disobedience, peaceful means of protest, expressed their discontent, that they wanted a new society. They wanted political will to move forward on these kind of issues. You know, Harry, I'll be honest, people ask me, oh, did you see in April when the My Step movement began in Gyumri, did you see where this would end? And the answer is no. I didn't. But what I think we all saw, what we all felt here in Armenia and those that follow the country was the sense of some growing frustration, some growing demand for change among the Armenian people. So I think we all knew change was coming, there would have to be change, that My Step and Mr. Pashinyan would be the agent of that change. We didn't call up front, yes. But the Armenian people saw it and they made it happen. And it's inspiring, and it's, I think, putting Armenia in the right path, and I leave here very hopeful for Armenia's future.
And interesting comments from Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. He said that when we see in some other corners, in some other democracies, even backward movements, we see here in Armenia, in the opposite is happening. Mm-hmm. Democracy is flourishing. I mean, and with the same comments, with the same line we heard from Emmanuel Macron. Yes. How would you are you optimistic about the future of democracy in Armenia?
I am, because I know it's what the Armenian people want. And I've learned from really watching Armenia for the last 25 years mm-hmm. that you should never bet against the Armenian people. Their ability to persevere, their ability...
You never bet against the Armenian people?
Never bet against the Armenian people. Despite a tragic history, despite a great history, they've survived in a difficult neighborhood, and they've persevered, and they, I think, know what they want, and they're going to achieve it. So I'm confident. I think the democratic future here is bright. What I would say as a friend is it's important that in this euphoria, this moment of support and demand for change, that all Armenians make sure every Armenian feels they can speak out. Mm-hmm. That even those that might have some criticism of the government, might not be happy about where things are going, they feel free, they can speak up. And of course there should be aggressive debate in social media and stations like this, but it's important that I hope that stays within certain bounds. I have to admit, looking at social media, and there's been some really heated rhetoric, some ugly rhetoric, I think, against folks. Some of it's frankly misogynist sometimes, and it just doesn't represent what I know the Armenian people want. So that would be my only caution to my friends. Be sure and keep the public space open, keep it civil, and don't assume that just because someone has a concern, they're counter-revolutionary or they want to derail where things are headed. I don't believe that's true.
Yeah, and another thing that you met Prime Minister and you described him. You said he's like John Adams, right? Second president of the United States. How would you say that? What's your impression about him? I mean, what's your take on Nikol Pashinyan?
Well, you know, I've had the great honor of meeting the Prime Minister several times, both before he assumed leadership and after becoming Prime Minister. And I think the thing that struck me is, you know, the question I think so many of us had was, can he move from revolutionary leader, street politician, protester, to leadership, to governing? Because those are different skills. Yeah. And not everyone can make that transition. We've seen some people fail at that. I have to say, I have been impressed in my most recent meetings to see him. He is becoming more comfortable with the role of leader. He's still, I think, learning, but I'm impressed with the gravitas that he has, as we say, and that he's taking a bigger picture. I selected a biography of John Adams to give to him. John Adams is my favorite American founding father, partly because John Adams made that transition. John Adams is one of the real rebel leaders of the American Revolution. He became second president, and he did two things I think that are important. First, he was always clear that the American Revolution, as he famously said, will not be won on the battlefields, it will not be won in the streets. It will be won by convincing the hearts and minds of the American people that this is the right thing to do. And I think that's important. And I think the Prime Minister understands that. I think he knows ultimately he has to win hearts and minds and get everyone going the right way in terms of improving Armenia. Secondly, I admire John Adams because, unlike George Washington, who served 2 terms, John Adams was defeated for president in 1800 after serving 1 term. And he accepted the will of the people, and he walked away from being president. And American history could have been very, very different if he had resisted and said, oh, well, George Washington got 2 terms, I should get 2 terms. But he didn't. He stepped away. And in some ways, I think that's the most important thing that any leader can do, recognize when they need to listen to the will of the people. So that was kind of the messaging I was sending with my gift.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Prime Minister will not be elected 2nd term, right?
Right.
We don't know yet.
We don't know. He may have 3 or 4 terms.
Exactly, yeah. And according to our information, you met, you said that, you commented, we have seen a first election after Velvet Revolution on September 23rd. Armenia gave more than 81% of vote to the electoral bloc, backed by Pashinyan. Were you following these municipal elections, and would you qualify them as free and fair? Was there any concern that you had?
The embassy did monitor the elections, as we always do, just to monitor what's happening and reach our, follow the results. We did have embassy teams, a few embassy teams in the polls on that Sunday. We were pleased with the conduct, and I think, of the elections, and we were pleased to see that all the political parties accepted the results as free and credible, and there was no serious, significant allegations of fraud or vote buying or other irregularities that had marred previous elections. So I congratulate the city of Yerevan and the election commission for what they achieved.
So it's like first successful exercise, democratic exercise. And what's your opinion on snap elections? Now we know that Prime Minister is going to resign, and then after Parliament fails to elect a new Prime Minister, the Parliament will be dissolved and the new elections will be held in December. What do you think about that?
Well, first on elections, just one more point I'd like to make. The issue of free and fair elections was always one of political will.
Exactly.
Even the elections in April last year, the parliamentary elections, I believe that the way people voted that Sunday in April was reflected in the results. That process was free, it was pretty fair, the irregularities, the serious problems in that election happened outside the polling place.
Yes.
With the vote buying and the voter intimidation and the use of government resources illegally to force people to vote a certain way. And I actually believe once the political will was there by the Armenian people and the government not to do that, I was always confident Armenia could have free and fair elections. And so we saw that in Yerevan. In terms of snap elections, again, that's a decision for the political parties in dialogue with the government to make. It's not a decision that we'll comment on. What we will be watching as a friend is to make sure that the process is reached, date is reached through dialogue, and that it gives everybody who participates an equal and free chance to participate.
I mean, these are normal, this is normal, you know, legal exercise, right? There is nothing wrong to hold snap elections because, you know, as you know, the former ruling party would often criticize that it's too early to hold elections and we don't need these elections, you know, we can do that in 1 year time. But what do you think?
Again, I think it's for the political parties and the government to decide what's best.
Yes. And now let's talk about U.S.-Armenia relations. And are there any untapped opportunities to further improve our relations with the United States? What's your take on that?
I feel very proud and pleased as I leave for my team at the embassy. I think our relations with Armenia are probably as strong and as deep as they've been in many, many years. I think you know, the U.S. government, as I announced just last week, through an increase in our assistance, non-military assistance, we want to support the changes here. We want to support what the Armenian people are trying to achieve. So I think the relationship's in a good place. I'm very pleased that we're going to have senior level visitor here in about 2 weeks, John Bolton.
John Bolton is coming.
Will be coming. He'll be the highest ranking U.S. official to visit, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years. So I think relationships are good. Where we might deepen, I'd like to see more economic trade, obviously. And again, as I said, I think there's interest, so I'm encouraged there as long as things move forward in the right way. Where I hope we might see some more engagement is from the diaspora. Yes. And I'm hearing from the diaspora in the United States, they're interested. There's a renewed sense of enthusiasm. So I think we may see some more diasporan philanthropy or diasporan engagement in life here, maybe even the return of some diasporans to contribute. And
and the last question about Pashinyan's ability to work with the foreign leaders, you know. There's some criticism that he's not experienced. You know, what's your take on that?
I have to say, my take is so far he's done a pretty good job of working with foreign leaders. I don't sit in his meetings with leaders from Putin to Merkel or May to Prime Minister Trudeau, but my impression is he's done a pretty good job of reassuring all of us that Armenia's foreign policy, its engagement with all of us, will remain unchanged. There are going to be no sharp veers in Armenian foreign policy, which is what I think we certainly in the U.S. government want to see. I think he's handled the Nagorno-Karabakh issue well in his public statements. He's, I think, sent the right signals about wanting to negotiate, wanting to perhaps see some renewed emphasis after the election here. We hope to see that. So I think he's done a pretty good job for a novice.
Mr. Ambassador, now your final thoughts about Armenia. You have a chance now to talk to our people. You always have a chance, but this is on our air. Please do so. If you want to say something, you can just address the people right now.
Well, that's very gracious of you. What I would say is thank you. Thank you to the Armenian people for opening your hearts, opening your houses, opening your businesses, letting me learn from you, letting me hear about what you would like to see U.S.-Armenian relations become, how the U.S. can help, and helping me learn some lessons from this great culture that I can take back to the United States. You know, one of the things I leave here most really impressed by is that, as I said, Armenia, despite a tough neighborhood, despite a tragic history, has held on to its national self, held on to its culture, held on to its identity, but at the same time drawn from the neighbors around it, and always been open to other influences, always been open to the best of other cultures. Right now in the 21st century, that's an important message, and it's a lesson I'm going to take back with me to the United States and to other foreign posts I have. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Harry. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Good luck. Thank you.